I've learned something over the years. Real crimes don't start in dark alleys or with guns drawn. They start in conference rooms with frosted glass and expensive chairs. Places where nobody raises their voice, where everything sounds reasonable, until it isn't. Shareholder collusion is a decision made in a closed room. That's what I told myself back then. That's how I justified it. My name's William. I'm not writing this for sympathy, and definitely not for forgiveness. Think of this as documentation. Or maybe a warning, if you're the kind of person who still thinks crime looks like it does in movies. This one started about 8 years ago. I was a mid-level financial analyst, nothing flashy, but close enough to the top to see how things really worked. Numbers were my thing. Patterns, trends, anomalies. I could spot them before anyone else. That's what got me invited into that meeting. It wasn't supposed to be anything special. Just a late-night discussion with a few senior stakeholders about a strategic adjustment. That's the phrase they used. Neutral. Harmless. The kind of language that makes you forget you're talking about real consequences. But I remember the moment it shifted. Someone locked the door. And just like that, it wasn't a meeting anymore. I should have walked out the moment the door clicked shut. That's the normal reaction, right? But nothing about that room felt urgent or threatening. No raised voices, no tension you could point to. Just 3 men in tailored suits and 1 empty chair. Mine. They didn't waste time. One of them, Harris, I'll use that name, slid a folder across the table. Inside were projections, market forecasts, competitor analyses. At first glance, it looked like standard corporate strategy. But then I noticed the alignment, numbers from different firms moving in ways they shouldn't. Prices stabilizing artificially. Growth curves synchronized. That's when it hit me, this wasn't strategy. It was coordination. Perfectly legal if handled correctly, Harris said like he'd read my thoughts. We're just ensuring stability. Preventing unnecessary volatility. That word, stability, did a lot of heavy lifting. They didn't ask me to join. Not directly. They just explained the system, showed me the gaps, and then asked what I would do to optimize it. I knew exactly what they wanted. And worse, I already had the answer. I didn't say yes that night. But I didn't say no either. That's the thing about decisions like this. They don't happen in a single moment. They stretch out, blur into everyday life, sneak into your thoughts while you're brushing your teeth or staring at your phone at 2 a.m. I went home with a copy of the data. Just review it, Harris had said, like it was homework. Like I wasn't being quietly invited into something illegal. For 3 days I told myself I was just analyzing. Nothing more. I built models, ran simulations, stress-tested their projections. And every time, the conclusion came back the same: it would work. Not just work, perfectly. That's when the rationalization started. No one gets hurt, I told myself. It's just numbers shifting between already wealthy shareholders. The market corrects itself anyway. If I don't do it, someone else will. At least I can control it, make it cleaner. I even convinced myself it was elegant. By the 4th night, I wasn't questioning whether it was wrong. I was refining how to do it better. Once I crossed that mental line, everything became technical. Morality has a funny way of going quiet when you turn a problem into a system. I stopped thinking in terms of right and wrong and started thinking in variables, timing windows, and communication gaps. The core idea was simple: align pricing behavior across multiple firms without leaving a traceable trail. No direct emails, no obvious coordination. Just patterns. Signals hidden in plain sight. I built what I called a lag model. Each company would adjust prices based on publicly available indicators, but those indicators were carefully chosen and slightly delayed. It created the illusion of independent decision-making, while actually syncing everyone together. Clean. Indirect. Hard to prove. We also needed buffers, middle layers of analysts, and automated triggers so no one at the top looked directly involved. Plausible deniability wasn't optional, it was the foundation. I presented the framework a week later. No applause. No celebration. Just quiet nods around the table. That's when I realized something unsettling. They hadn't needed me to invent it. They needed me to perfect it. Implementation didn't happen overnight. That's another misconception. Big crimes like this move slowly, almost boringly so. We started with what Harris called harmless adjustments. Small-scale tests in less visible markets. Nothing dramatic, just slight pricing shifts that wouldn't attract attention individually. But together, they formed a pattern. My job was to monitor. Every morning, I'd sit at my desk like nothing had changed, coffee going cold while I tracked the ripple effects. Competitors followed the signals almost perfectly. Not because they knew, but because the system nudged them in predictable ways. That was the terrifying part. We weren't controlling people. We were controlling reactions. There were hiccups, of course. One firm reacted too aggressively, overshooting the price band. Another lagged behind, creating a temporary gap. I adjusted the model, tightened the triggers, recalibrated the delays. Each fix made it smoother, cleaner, safer. And with every successful iteration, the room got quieter, more confident. No one asked if we should stop. Instead, the question shifted, unspoken but obvious. How far could we push this before anyone noticed? The shift from testing to full rollout didn't come with an announcement. No milestone, no green light. One day we were observing behavior, and the next, we were steering it. It started with a coordinated adjustment across 3 major firms. Subtle on paper, fractions of a percent, time days apart. But when the market settled, the effect was undeniable. Prices held steady where they should have fluctuated. Margins widened. Quietly, efficiently. I remember staring at the dashboard that morning. Lines that used to zigzag were now smooth, predictable, controlled. That should have scared me more than it did. Instead, I felt something closer to pride. Like I'd solved a complex equation no one else could crack. The system wasn't just working, it was elegant. Harris called it stability achieved. We all knew what it really was. Money started moving differently after that. Bonuses increased. Conversations got shorter, more confident. No one lingered on details anymore. Because the truth was, we'd already crossed the hardest part. From there, it wasn't about whether we could do it. It was about maintaining the illusion that we weren't. For a while, everything held. Too well, actually. Markets aren't supposed to look that calm. Even people outside the system started noticing. Analysts on forums, minor blogs, the kind of voices companies usually ignore. They called it unnatural stability, algorithmic herding, things like that. At first, we dismissed it as noise. But noise has a way of growing if you don't manage it. That's when my role expanded. It wasn't enough to design the system anymore. I had to distort perception of it. Introduce controlled volatility. Tiny disruptions to make the market look alive again. So I built in imperfections. Randomized delays. Occasional misalignments. Just enough chaos to keep everything believable. It felt almost ironic. We had to fake unpredictability to protect something entirely artificial. One evening, Harris pulled me aside after a meeting. "You're not just maintaining the system," he said. "You're curating reality." He meant it as a compliment. I didn't respond. Because for the first time, something about all of this started to feel fragile. Every system has one. Doesn't matter how clean your model is, how tight your assumptions are, there's always something that doesn't behave the way it's supposed to. Ours came in the form of a mid-sized firm that refused to follow the pattern. At first, it looked like random deviation. Their pricing lagged too long, then jumped too far. It disrupted the rhythm just enough to create visible cracks. Analysts started asking sharper questions this time. Not noise anymore, direction. I dug into their data, expecting incompetence. What I found instead unsettled me. They weren't reacting wrong. They were reacting independently. No reliance on the indicators we'd subtly shaped. No predictable lag. It was like they were operating outside the system entirely. I flagged it in the next meeting. Suggested adjustments, maybe stronger signals to pull them back in line. Harris listened, then shook his head. Too visible, he said. We don't pull them in. I frowned. Then what do we do? He held my gaze a second longer than usual. We make them irrelevant. That was the first time it stopped feeling like numbers. Making a company irrelevant sounds abstract, until you're the one mapping out how to do it. We couldn't touch them directly. No sudden price wars, no obvious targeting. That would have drawn exactly the kind of attention we were trying to avoid. Instead, the plan was slower, indirect, surgical. I identified their dependencies, suppliers, distribution channels, credit exposure. Weak points disguised as normal business relationships. Then we adjusted our behavior around those nodes. Prices shifted just enough to squeeze their margins. Supply timelines tightened, not cut off, just less favorable. Credit conditions across the network subtly hardened. Individually, each change looked like market fluctuation. Together, they formed a chokehold. I tracked their responses daily. At first, they adapted. Cut costs, adjusted forecasts, tried to compensate. But independence has a cost when everyone else is quietly aligned against you. 2 weeks in, their pricing started to waver. A month later, they were reacting, finally falling into patterns we could predict. Harris called it natural correction. I didn't correct him. But I remember staring at the data that night and realizing something uncomfortable. We hadn't fixed the system. We'd removed the one part that was real. The thing about systems built on illusion is that they don't fail all at once. They fracture quietly. It started with an email, forwarded, buried in a chain I wasn't supposed to see. Someone from compliance questioning pricing synchronicity across firms. The language was cautious, but the implication was clear: something doesn't add up. I flagged it immediately. Harris didn't seem alarmed. Internal curiosity, he said. It happens. But it didn't stop there. A week later, there was a request for expanded reporting. Then an external audit mention, routine, apparently. Always routine. Except the timing was wrong. I began running reverse checks on my own system, trying to see it the way an outsider would. Patterns I'd once admired now looked obvious. Not to everyone, maybe, but to the right person? It wouldn't take much. I suggested scaling back, introducing more variance. Harris leaned back, calm as ever. If we move now, we confirm suspicion. So we do nothing? I asked. He smiled slightly. We stay consistent. That was the moment I realized consistency wasn't safety. It was exposure waiting for recognition. They formed a small internal group to review anomalies. That's how it was framed. Quiet, controlled, nothing official. But I knew what it really was: containment. And somehow, I ended up on it. That should tell you everything about how these systems work. If you're close enough to the problem, you're also considered the best person to manage it. Or bury it. Depends on how you look at it. The team was small, 3 analysts, 1 compliance officer, and me. We met twice a week, going over datasets I had practically built myself. Watching them dissect my work, piece by piece, was surreal. One of the analysts, a woman named Elena, was sharp. Too sharp. She pointed out timing irregularities within the first session. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to narrow the focus. Feels coordinated, she said casually. I kept my expression neutral. Or just correlated, I replied. She didn't argue. But she didn't drop it either. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I thought we'd been caught. But because, for the first time, I was sitting on both sides of the table, and I wasn't sure which one was worse. That I told myself I could manage it. If I controlled the investigation, I could steer it. Redirect focus, dilute conclusions, keep everything just ambiguous enough to avoid escalation. That was the plan, anyway. So I made adjustments. Not to the system itself, that would have been too obvious, but to the data we presented. Sampling windows shifted. Outliers reframed as statistical noise. Visualizations redesigned to soften the patterns that once stood out. Technically, nothing I showed was false. But it wasn't the truth either. Elena noticed. She didn't confront me directly. Instead, she started bringing her own datasets, parallel analyses that didn't rely on my inputs. Cleaner. Less curated. In one meeting, she laid out a comparison side by side. Different lenses, she said, almost casually. Different conclusions. No accusation. No pressure. Just enough to make the room uncomfortable. I responded the only way I could, leaned into uncertainty, emphasized complexity, buried clarity under layers of explanation. It worked. At least for the others. But Elena just watched me. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. The biggest risk wasn't the system failing. It was someone choosing to see it clearly. It didn't explode. There was no dramatic reveal, no headlines overnight. It leaked. A small report, anonymous, unofficial, circulated in a niche financial forum. The kind of place most executives would never even hear about. But I saw it within an hour. Because it was my pattern. Stripped down, simplified, but unmistakable. Coordinated lag structures. Artificial stability. Even the noise I'd built in, it was all there, outlined like someone had been watching from the inside. Or thinking like I did. The report didn't name companies. Didn't accuse directly. It just asked questions. The kind that stick. Internally, panic stayed, controlled. Officially, it was dismissed as speculation. Unverified. Irrelevant. But behind closed doors, the tone shifted. Meetings got shorter. Conversations more careful. Harris stopped using words like stable. And Elena? She didn't say a word to me. But one day, as we were leaving a meeting, she paused just long enough to say, "Patterns don't stay hidden forever." Then she walked away. That was the first moment I considered something I hadn't allowed myself before. This wasn't slipping. It was unraveling. After the leak, everything tightened. Access logs were reviewed. Communication channels restricted. Suddenly, every action left a shadow, and everyone was aware of it. The same people who once thrived in quiet certainty now moved like they were being watched, because, in a way, they were. Externally, regulators started asking broader questions. Nothing specific, nothing accusatory. Just requests. Data pulls. Clarifications. Inside, the tone shifted from confidence to containment. Harris called a final closed-door meeting. Smaller than before. No pretense this time. "We unwind," he said. "Gradually. No signals. No patterns." It sounded simple. It wasn't. You can't just dismantle something like that overnight. The system had roots, deep ones. Pull too hard, and it would snap into visibility. Move too slow, and the scrutiny would catch up. I spent days trying to design an exit that looked like randomness. But the truth is, there's no clean way out of something built to be invisible. Around that time, Elena stopped coming to meetings. No explanation. That worried me more than anything else. We never got a dramatic ending. No raids. No handcuffs. No moment where everything crashed at once. Instead, it dissolved, slowly, deliberately. Prices began to drift again, irregular and messy like they're supposed to be. Reports lost their edge. Questions stopped coming. Officially, nothing had happened. Unofficially, people disappeared. Not literally, but roles changed, departments reshuffled, contracts quietly ended. Harris retired. Others moved on. The system didn't collapse, it was absorbed back into normalcy like it had never existed. I stayed. That's probably the part one think about the most. No one accused me. No one even hinted. On paper, I was just another analyst who'd been part of a complicated period. Clean record. Intact career. But something shifted. I can't look at data the same way anymore. Patterns don't feel neutral, they feel intentional, even when they aren't. Every clean line makes me wonder what's underneath it. If you're reading this and thinking something like this is clever, it is. That's the problem. Because once you learn how easy it is to reshape reality, quietly, logically, you don't unlearn it. And not everyone chooses to stop.